Black CEO ignored on a rooftop meeting 14 minutes. Later, she bought the entire building. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Tanya walked into the upscale rooftop meeting with a sense of quiet authority. She was dressed simply, without the ostentatious luxury many would expect from a CEO of her caliber. As she entered, the room seemed to freeze for a moment. No one acknowledged her. The air was thick with unspoken judgments, and whispers filled the space as people looked her up and down. "You don't belong here." A voice from the back broke the silence, a sharp statement that cut through the calm. It was Jason, one of the senior executives, who barely glanced up from his phone. Tanya didn't flinch. She knew exactly how the game was played. But what they didn't know was that she owned this building. Every inch of it. "I don't need your approval," she thought to herself, but held her ground, walking to the center of the room. The meeting continued as if she wasn't even there. A slight that wasn't new but still stung. She reached for her phone, sent a message, and made a call to her assistant. "Protocol 6, she said quietly. The assistant on the other end knew what that meant. This would be handled swiftly. Moments later, Tanya stood up and calmly addressed the room, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "I own this building. This meeting, and every word that's been spoken here today, are being recorded. Your judgment, your bias, and your actions will cost you more than you think." The room went still, everyone looking around at each other, unsure of what to make of her. But Tanya wasn't done. She had a plan. A power move that would show everyone what happens when a black CEO is ignored, humiliated, and belittled. She knew exactly how to play this, and it was time to turn the tables. Watch as Tanya takes control of this situation, reclaiming her power in the most satisfying way possible. Don't go anywhere, this is just the beginning. The room was silent for a moment as Tanya's words sank in. She had just revealed her identity as the owner of the building, and the tension was palpable. The executives, who moments before had dismissed her as nothing more than a nuisance, now exchanged nervous glances. Jason, the senior executive who had spoken the harsh words earlier, was the first to break the silence. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face pale as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Tanya, we didn't know. We had no idea who you were," he stammered, his voice faltering. But Tanya, still standing in the center of the room, wasn't interested in excuses. She had heard it all before, excuses made by people who never expected someone like her to be in charge. She walked toward the window, looking out over the city skyline, her mind racing with the many times she had been underestimated in her career. "That's the problem, Jason," she said, her voice steady, but filled with quiet fury. "You assumed I didn't belong here, and you let that assumption cloud your judgment. Well, now you're going to learn exactly who I am, and it won't be with words." Tanya's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, her eyes scanning the screen. It was a message from her assistant, confirming that everything was in place. The meeting had escalated, and now it was time to act. She tapped the screen, typing out a quick response. "Initiate phase 2, she sent. Her assistant knew exactly what that meant: full control, full access, and no turning back. Tanya turned back to face the room, her expression unreadable. "I've made my decision," she said. "This building, this company, everything you thought you owned, it's mine now. I'm buying it all." Jason and the others were stunned into silence, unable to process what she was saying. Tanya didn't wait for them to respond. She didn't need their validation. She already had what she wanted. The power was in her hands now, and they would either accept it or be swept aside. The meeting continued, in a haze of disbelief, as Tanya's words settled into the minds of those around her. They had underestimated her, and now they were about to face the consequences. Tanya's assistant sent another message, confirming that the necessary paperwork was being processed and that the deal would be finalized within minutes. She had achieved what she had set out to do. She had flipped the tables on them, showing them the true meaning of power. And just as the room began to buzz with nervous chatter, Tanya stood up once more, her gaze unwavering. "I suggest you all leave now," she said coldly. "There's nothing more for you here. This is my company, my building, and you no longer have a place in it." The room fell into stunned silence once again as the executives slowly began to stand and gather their things, unable to comprehend the swift turn of events. Tanya didn't move, watching them leave with the calm assurance of someone who had already won. She had taken back control, and nothing would stop her now. Tanya stood by the window, watching the last of the executives file out of the room, their faces flushed with embarrassment and disbelief. She could hear their hushed voices outside the door, still processing the shocking turn of events. It was a satisfying moment, but Tanya knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't interested in revenge. What she craved was something more lasting, something that would change the dynamics of the company for good. She walked over to the sleek, dark wood desk at the far side of the room and sat down, her fingers dancing across the surface as she pulled up the company's financials on the tablet. She reviewed the numbers with a calm intensity, her mind already working on the next steps. This wasn't just about one meeting or one group of people. This was about redefining how business was done in her company. She was going to make sure that every part of this building, every decision, was in her hands. Tanya's assistant, Carla, sent her a quick text, confirming that the necessary legal papers were already in motion. The sale was happening. The building was hers officially. A small smile tugged at Tanya's lips as she responded, "Perfect. Let's move forward with the next phase." As she sent the message, her phone buzzed again. It was from the head of security. "Everything is ready for the transition," the message read. Tanya stood up, taking a deep breath as she looked out at the city. It was a beautiful view, but she knew it was more than just a cityscape. It was her empire now. She picked up the phone and dialed her lawyer, instructing them to finalize the paperwork for the acquisition of the building and immediately begin restructuring the leadership team. No more token hires, no more empty gestures. She was going to fill the executive team with people who understood her vision, people who didn't question her authority based on her race or appearance, but on her competence and her power. As Tanya hung up the phone, she turned her attention to the next task. She needed to address the staff, the ones who had been quiet, the ones who had seen what happened and hadn't said a word, had to know that things were going to change. Tanya walked to the office door and opened it, stepping out into the hallway. The building was hers, and now it was time to make sure everyone inside knew it. As she moved down the hall, she passed by employees who had been watching the whole scene unfold. Their eyes followed her, some filled with respect, others with fear, but all of them were paying attention now. Tanya's presence was undeniable. She was no longer the underdog. She was the one in charge, and she was going to make sure that everyone, from the top to the bottom, understood exactly what that meant. Tanya walked through the hallway with purposeful strides, each step echoing in the quiet, sterile building. The employees who had witnessed the tense meeting were now scattered around the office, some nervously returning to their tasks, others still unsure of what to make of the dramatic scene they had just witnessed. Tanya's presence was commanding, and her every movement seemed to draw attention. She knew that the transformation of this company wouldn't happen overnight, but today was the beginning of something irreversible. She entered the executive suite, a space that had always felt cold and distant to her. It had been a place for people who looked the part, who had been elevated based on connections, not merit. She stood at the entrance for a moment, letting the silence settle. This is where it changes, she thought, stepping inside. The room was empty except for Carla, who had been waiting patiently at her desk. Tanya sat down in the chair across from her, her eyes focused. "It's all in motion now," Tanya said calmly, her voice firm but controlled. Carla nodded, already prepared. "I've reviewed the transition plan, and everything is set. We'll begin restructuring the leadership team immediately. I've flagged the individuals who need to be removed and started reaching out to potential replacements." Tanya leaned back in her chair, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Good. But I want it to be clear that this is not just about removing people who don't fit the vision. This is about building a company culture where no one gets to undermine or disrespect anyone based on assumptions. No more of that. We start fresh." Carla looked up, meeting Tanya's gaze. There was a sense of quiet respect in her eyes, a recognition of Tanya's strength and vision. Understood, Carla replied. Tanya took a deep breath and looked out the window. The view of the city was vast, a metaphor for the new horizons she was about to explore. She had worked too hard to get here, and now that the reins were finally in her hands, she wasn't about to let go. She wasn't just going to change the building she owned, she was going to change the very foundation of the company. I'll be addressing the team later today, Tanya continued, her voice steady. I want them to know that from now on, this company will be defined by integrity, respect, and most importantly, by true leadership. If anyone has a problem with that, they can leave. Carla nodded, taking note of the intensity in Tanya's words. Tanya stood up and walked toward the door, her posture as confident as ever. She was no longer just a figurehead in the room, she was the driving force. The people in this building would either rise with her or fall behind, and she was certain they would fall behind if they didn't keep up. As she exited the office, she glanced back at Carla, who was already working on the next steps. Let's make sure the transition goes smoothly, Tanya said. We've got work to do. She walked out into the hallway, her mind set on the changes she would soon implement. She knew that no matter what obstacles they threw her way, she had the power to dismantle them, piece by piece, and she was ready. Tanya walked through the building, her steps confident and deliberate. She could feel the eyes of the staff on her, but this time, there was a noticeable shift in the air. The whispers from earlier had turned into murmurs of curiosity and respect. It was clear that word of her actions had spread quickly. As she made her way toward the main conference room, she passed by the remaining executives who had attended the meeting earlier. They were standing in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, clearly still in shock. Tanya didn't acknowledge them. There was no need. She had already made her point, and she was moving on to the next stage. She entered the conference room, where the team was gathered for the meeting. The room was filled with people who had been waiting for her to arrive. The tension was thick, but Tanya wasn't fazed. She had prepared herself for this moment. As she walked to the front, she could see the fear in some faces, the hesitation in others, but she knew what had to be done. I'm sure you all have questions, Tanya began, her voice calm yet firm. I'm sure you're all wondering what happens next. The answer is simple. Everything changes. She paused, letting her words sink in. From this moment forward, we are going to run this company differently. There will be no more preferential treatment based on appearance, race, or who you know. If you are here, it is because you have earned the right to be. If you are not here to contribute to that, you can leave. The room was silent. No one dared speak. Not yet. Tanya took a deep breath, standing tall, her posture commanding. We are going to rebuild the leadership structure. I will not tolerate anyone undermining the progress we've made, and I will not allow anyone to discredit or disrespect others based on assumptions. You will either rise with me, or you will be left behind. Tanya's eyes scanned the room, locking eyes with each person one by one. I know what it's like to be underestimated. I know what it's like to be told you don't belong. But today, I am telling you, we are all here to make this company stronger. If you aren't willing to stand up and prove your worth, then you will not have a place here. Understand that. There was a slight shift in the room as the weight of her words settled in. A few of the executives exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared challenge her. Tanya continued, we will also be implementing new protocols to ensure that everyone here is treated with fairness and respect. No one will be above that. No one. As she finished speaking, Tanya turned toward the door, signaling the end of the meeting. The staff sat in stunned silence, but she knew they would soon understand. This was only the beginning of the transformation. She walked out of the room with a sense of purpose, already thinking about the next steps. She had set the wheels in motion, and there was no going back now. Tanya stepped into her office, the door clicking shut behind her with a quiet finality. She took a deep breath, leaning back against the door for a moment as she gathered her thoughts. The meeting had been a success, but this was only the first step in a much larger plan. Her mind was already racing through the logistics of the changes she had just outlined. There was no time to waste. She walked over to the desk and sat down, pulling up the list of staff members she had flagged for the upcoming leadership overhaul. The list was long, but it was necessary. Tanya had built her success by surrounding herself with the best, not the most connected or the most familiar. She needed people who believed in merit, who understood the importance of fairness, and who weren't afraid to stand up for what was right. A soft buzz interrupted her thoughts. It was Carla, her assistant. She picked up the phone, her tone immediately firm and focused. "Yes, Carla, what's the update?" Carla's voice came through clearly, the sound of papers rustling in the background. "The restructuring team is already in place. We've reached out to the candidates for the new leadership roles. They'll be here by the end of the week for interviews. Everything's progressing according to plan." Tanya nodded, taking the information in stride. "Good. Make sure that the current team understands the urgency. I don't want any delays." She paused, thinking about the challenges ahead. "I also need you to prepare a public statement. We'll need to address the media soon. Let them know what we're doing, and why. We can't afford to let the narrative get out of our control." Carla agreed, her voice steady as always. "Understood. I'll draft the statement and send it to you for approval." Tanya ended the call and sat back in her chair, looking out of the window. The city skyline stretched out before her, a sea of glass and steel that reflected the power she now held. She had come a long way from the days of being dismissed, underestimated, and sidelined. Now, she was on top, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was hers to walk. Tanya stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. She had big plans for this building, for this company, and for the people who worked here. She was going to turn this place into a true symbol of what was possible when you didn't let anyone define you by anything other than your ability. As she stood there, a feeling of resolve settled over her. She was in charge now, and nothing would stand in her way. Tanya stood at the edge of the balcony, the wind tousling her hair as she stared out at the sprawling city below. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for, and now it was under her control. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the skyline, but Tanya's mind was far from the peaceful view. There was still so much to do, so many pieces to move. She had sent the message to her team, but it was time to take it a step further. She wasn't going to let the media or her competitors define this moment. She would define it herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her back to reality. She pulled it out and saw the message from Carla. "The candidates for the new leadership roles will be arriving tomorrow. Everything's ready. The public statement is also prepared." Tanya nodded, her mind already moving forward. She replied quickly, "Good, let's make sure this goes smoothly. Prepare for the meeting tomorrow. I'll be there early." The new leadership team was the key to solidifying her vision for the company, and she wasn't going to settle for anyone who didn't align with her values. She needed people who would support her plan for a new direction, a new company culture. Tanya walked back inside, her pace quickening as she thought about the future. She couldn't afford any more mistakes. Every decision she made now would echo through the company, and she had to be certain the right people were in place to help her implement the changes. The staff she had dismissed earlier had been a wake-up call, but Tanya wasn't interested in vengeance. She was focused on the bigger picture, creating a culture where respect, integrity, and merit were the driving forces behind every decision. The building she had just acquired wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of that change. As she sat at her desk, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to finalize the plans for the next day. But before she typed a word, her phone rang again. It was Carla. "The media is asking for a comment," she said. Tanya's eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell them they'll get their statement soon, but only when I'm ready. We're not going to rush this. Let them wait." Carla hesitated for a moment. "Understood. I'll hold them off." Tanya hung up the phone, her resolve strengthening. She wasn't going to let anyone dictate the timing of her success. She had worked too hard to get here, and she would take control of her narrative just as she had taken control of the company. Tomorrow would be another step in her journey, and she was ready. Tanya took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. This was just the beginning. Tanya woke early the next morning, her mind already buzzing with the tasks ahead. She was used to the weight of responsibility, but today felt different. The power she had gained over the company was now her foundation, and she was determined to make every decision count. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her suit, She could see the change in herself. The person staring back was someone who had overcome everything, someone who was no longer afraid of being overlooked. Today, she would take the final steps in reshaping the company into something that truly reflected her values. She grabbed her phone and checked her messages. Carla had confirmed that the new leadership team was arriving within the hour, ready for their first official meeting. Tanya couldn't afford to waste any time. She walked out of her apartment, her confidence radiating with every step. The drive to the office was smooth, the city waking up around her as she made her way toward the building she had just acquired. The office building wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a living testament to her success, her persistence, and her refusal to be defined by anyone else's expectations. When Tanya arrived, she was greeted by Carla and the others who had prepared for the meeting. The new candidates for leadership stood nearby, some familiar faces, others strangers eager for the chance to prove themselves. As Tanya entered the conference room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The candidates looked at her with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. She could feel their eyes on her, studying her every move. Tanya knew she had to set the tone right away. She walked to the front of the room, her posture straight, and addressed the team. "I'm sure you're all wondering what happens next. Let me make it clear. Things are going to change around here. This company is about to enter a new era, and I'm going to need people who aren't afraid to speak up, to make decisions, and to lead with integrity." She paused, letting her words sink in. The silence in the room was deafening. If you think you're here to just collect a paycheck, or if you're here because of who you know, then this isn't the place for you. I'm building a team of leaders, not followers. I need people who will push boundaries, who will stand for what's right, no matter the cost. She scanned the room, locking eyes with each candidate, one by one. This is your chance to prove yourselves. Make the most of it. Tanya's gaze softened just a fraction as she finished. But let me also be clear. If you can't get on board with this vision, if you can't stand up for fairness, then you won't last here. I'm not going to let this company fall into the same patterns of favoritism and bias that have plagued it for far too long. We start fresh today. Tanya took a deep breath, standing tall, as the room absorbed her words. She had said everything she needed to say, and now it was time to see who would rise to the occasion. As she walked out of the conference room, Carla followed closely behind. Tanya felt a sense of calm knowing she had made the right decision. This was the start of something bigger than just her. It was a movement that would define the future of the company. Tanya sat at her desk, reviewing the emails and documents that had piled up over the last few days. Despite the whirlwind of changes happening within the company, she felt a sense of calm in this moment. The decisions she had made were starting to take root, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her vision for the company began to unfold. The new leadership team had been in place for a few hours now, and Tanya could already see the difference. They were focused, efficient, and, most importantly, aligned with her goals. As she scanned through the reports, a knock at the door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called. Carla entered, her expression serious but confident. "Tanya, we need to talk. The media is already catching wind of the changes. They've been asking for statements, and they're eager to know what comes next." Tanya leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Let them wait. We do this on our terms, not theirs." Carla nodded. "I agree, but we need to prepare. This is the kind of attention we can't afford to mishandle." Tanya thought for a moment, then stood up and walked over to the window. The city below seemed distant, but in her mind, everything was closer than it had ever been. "We'll release a statement when I'm ready, not before. But when we do, it will be a clear message this company is changing, and those who want to be a part of it better step up." Carla looked at Tanya with respect. "I'll draft the statement. But what about the employees? The ones who've been here for a while, the ones who've seen the old system at work? We can't just expect them to fall in line." Tanya smiled softly, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "I'm not expecting them to fall in line. I'm expecting them to rise. And if they can't, well, they'll have to leave." She turned back to Carla, her voice steady. "We're building something different here. The ones who stay will be the ones who help shape it. But those who want to hold on to the old ways will be left behind. I won't apologize for that." Carla nodded, understanding the gravity of Tanya's words. Understood. I'll get to work on the statement and prepare the rest of the team. Tanya took one last look out the window before walking over to her desk again. Good. Let's make sure everyone knows that the future of this company is about merit, fairness, and respect. And if they can't get on board with that, they have no place here. Carla left the room, and Tanya sat back down at her desk, ready for whatever came next. She had already taken control of the company. Now, she was ready to change the narrative. Not just for her, but for everyone in the organization. It was time to make the kind of impact that would be felt for years to come. Tanya walked through the halls of the building, feeling the weight of her decisions settle into her chest. It had been days since the restructuring had begun, and the changes were starting to take effect. The new leadership team was already making an impact, but there were still challenges ahead. She knew it wouldn't be easy to shift the culture of the company after years of ingrained biases and favoritism, but she was determined to see it through. As she passed by the staff, she noticed a mix of reactions. Some were hesitant, unsure of the new direction, while others seemed genuinely energized by the changes. Tanya smiled to herself. This was the kind of response she had been expecting. She entered her office, closing the door behind her, and took a seat at her desk. Her phone buzzed. It was Carla. The public statement is ready for your approval. The media has been asking for a comment, and they're eager to hear your thoughts, Carla said. Tanya took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk as she thought. Let them have their answers, but we do this on our terms, Tanya replied. I'm not going to rush this. When I speak, I want it to be clear that I'm not just addressing the press. I'm addressing the future of this company. She paused for a moment. Send the statement, but make sure it's firm. We are moving forward, and anyone who can't keep up doesn't have a place here. Carla responded quickly. Understood. I'll send it out immediately. Tanya set the phone down, her eyes scanning the room. The transformation she had set in motion was just beginning, and there were still so many pieces to put into place. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of control. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was leading. Tanya stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the city once more. The skyline stretched out before her, a constant reminder of the power she now held not just in the company, but in shaping the future. She wasn't done yet. The hardest work was ahead, but she was ready. The company was hers to rebuild, and she was determined to do it right. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to see it grow. Tanya sat in her office, staring at the screen in front of her. The company had taken a turn, and while she could feel the momentum building, she knew there were still obstacles ahead. The media had picked up on the changes, and the press release had already made waves. She was being watched, her every move analyzed, and yet she felt no fear. If anything, the attention only fueled her determination. The room was quiet, the city skyline visible through the large windows, but Tanya wasn't distracted. Her thoughts were on the people in the company who still hadn't fully embraced the shift in leadership. She had a vision for the future, but not everyone would be on board, and that was okay. Those who couldn't see the value in her approach would be the ones to leave. She had already begun setting up interviews with new candidates, individuals who shared her values of integrity, fairness, and leadership based on merit rather than connections. The new team would be the backbone of her company. Tanya's phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Carla. Tanya, we've had some feedback from the board about the restructuring, Carla said, her voice measured but concerned. Tanya's brow furrowed slightly. What did they say? She asked, keeping her tone neutral. They're supportive of the direction, but some of the senior members are feeling the pressure. They're questioning whether the changes are happening too quickly. Tanya took a deep breath, holding back the frustration that threatened to rise. She had expected this. Tell them we don't have time to waste. This company has been stagnant for too long. We can't afford to take our time and ease into change. She paused, letting the words sink in. Make it clear that this is happening now, and if they aren't willing to step up, they don't belong here. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Understood, Carla finally replied. Tanya hung up the phone, her mind already moving forward. There was no turning back now. The restructuring would continue, and she was going to make sure that every decision she made was a step toward building the company she envisioned, one that was based on competence, respect, and fairness. Tanya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The weight of the moment settled over her, but she didn't flinch. This was what she had worked for, and now she was seeing it come to life. She wasn't just running a company, she was changing the game. And she would continue to do so, no matter what it took. Tanya walked through the halls once more, this time with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The meeting with the board had gone better than expected, and while there were still some hesitant voices, she could feel the shift in the air. Her new team was already showing results, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like the company was moving in the right direction. The old ways were crumbling, and Tanya was the one driving that change. She paused for a moment in front of the executive suite, her fingers lightly grazing the polished doorframe as she thought about the journey that had brought her here. It hadn't been easy, but every setback had only made her stronger. As she stepped inside, she was greeted by Carla, who had a folder of reports ready for her. "Everything is progressing according to plan," Carla said with a slight smile, handing her the file. Tanya flipped through the pages quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the details. "Good," Tanya said, her voice calm but firm. "I want this to be fast. I don't have time to drag things out. Let's finalize everything today." Carla nodded. "We're ready to move forward. The team's on board, and the adjustments are already being implemented." Tanya took a deep breath and looked out the window. The city was vast, full of potential, and she was determined to make her mark. "I want every single employee to understand what's happening here," she said, turning back to Carla. "We're not just restructuring for the sake of change. We're building something that's going to last. This company will stand for something real: integrity, fairness, and respect. If they're not with us, they can leave. I won't beg anyone to stay." Carla looked at her, clearly impressed. "You've got this, Tanya. I've never seen anything like it." Tanya smiled, though it was more of a small nod of acknowledgement. "I'm not doing this for praise," she said quietly. "I'm doing this because it's what's right. We've been held back for too long, and I'm done waiting for change. Now, we're making it happen." She turned back toward the desk, pulling up the company's financials on the screen. The numbers were starting to show promise, but Tanya wasn't satisfied yet. There was more work to be done. As she began typing out her plans for the next phase of the transformation, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was just the beginning. She had taken control, and now, no one would be able to stop her.